time, do you ever feel like I'm counseling you when we're having an argument?
Of course, quite a bit actually. Yeah, sometimes I got to think through and wonder whether you are actually counseling me. It's almost like you're looking through me and trying to figure things out. And yeah, it can be quite intimidating sometimes.
Do I come across intimidating? Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, I guess over the years I've kind of learned as well to sort of understand where I'm at and to just speak from that place.
You felt that every time, if I did try to counsel you, that would be disrespectful in some ways. It would put you off.
Yeah, I mean, not disrespectful. It just feels unreal. It feels almost like it's a professional conversation.
Yeah.
Rather than something that you and I are actually talking about and having a normal conversation. It feels like you are counseling me, you're trying to help me to see certain things instead of me just trying to have a normal conversation with you.
We've been married 22 years,
yeah.
But I'm always, you know me, I'm a believer that we cannot give what we don't have. And I've always been very vulnerable and open and transparent about that I cannot share, I cannot counsel, I can't do what I am doing if I have not practiced it here.
Yeah.
So this is an honest conversation between the both of us, is how you see me and I show up in the marriage with you. But the early years was tough.
Is this going to go online now?
Yes. The early years were tough.
The earliest were tough, yes.
So I know I was very, very emotional. I had all the skills, but I still struggled with a lot of my own emotions and outbursts and whenever there were grievances between the both of us. I think the biggest question that sometimes I face with couples today is this fear with men dealing with emotional women. Like, how do you handle a woman when she's so emotional in the marriage? And I know I used to be there at one point of time. Like, what did you see, babe? Like, how did you move and navigate those things with me?
Well, if you ask me, it's probably one of the hardest things for any man to do. I mean, most of us, when we have among us men, when we have a conversation, it's about, what's the secret to a decent marriage or a happy marriage? They always say, happy wife, happy life.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like, it's always the case. Happy wife, just agree to your wife with everything she wants. Just make sure there's peace at home. I used to struggle to do that, mainly because, you had your point of view. I mean, the early days. You had your point of view and I had mine, and I used to struggle to agree.
Yeah.
And whenever we had disagreements, the things that really, the things that we used to disagree on sometimes were just petty. But just looking through it, we used to have so much of argument in the early days, and I used to think, oh my God, I made a mistake with this woman.
Yeah.
I made a mistake with this woman. But here we are, right? 22 years later. Yeah. But
I said the same thing too.
Yeah, we all did. I remember.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. But what was interesting as well is that we never could agree in a lot of things, and we sought counseling. Yeah. We spoke to people who could actually help us in the early days. That kind of stabilized. To a certain extent, stabilized the ship a little. It just kind of gave us certain parameters we can work with.
Yeah.
Certain ways to relate with one another.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that it is very difficult to relate to a woman in marriage when she's very emotional. I remember you used to get emotional and you used to say a lot of things, a lot of angry words, lots of weeping, crying, and all I saw was blank. And you get all angry, you used to say things. You get angry, you used to say things because I couldn't understand what you were going through. And you get angry, and after that I started to get angry because sometimes certain words used were very often in the early days felt very disrespectful. Yeah. And that used to really trigger me. When I started to feel that, and I used to lash out, and that just snowballed to something worse. So one small argument became bigger, and then for the next 3-4 days, it was silence, it was arguments, it was that cold treatment, it was all of that used to last for days and weeks sometimes.
Yeah.
I think it was good. Of course,
it's good now. Yeah.
I remember we used to go for counseling. We used to sit down and talk.
We can laugh about it now. Yeah.
We can laugh about it. It was crazy at that time. We used to think that this marriage is never going to last.
Yeah.
It's never going to last a few years. But here we are. But the thing is, I think looking back, we got counseling. We spoke to people who have done marriage for a number of years, and they started to explain things to me. And today, looking back, I'm glad that in a lot of ways, I did not look for peace. Yes, I did apologize. In a lot of cases,
Yeah.
I apologized after a
Yeah.
couple of days because I realized that was the fastest way to sort of
Break the ice. Yeah.
break the ice, bring some form of stability, some form of peace and calmness.
Yeah.
But over time, I also used to think that, I seem to be always the one who's apologizing.
Yeah.
It always felt like I'm the one at fault.
Yeah.
And that used to make me feel extremely upset, angry, but I used to keep to myself. I think over the
Yeah.
years, I've kind of
Shared
course,
it, yeah.
shared it with you. I said, why is it that I'm always the one, apologizing? I'm always
Yeah.
the one trying to make peace.
Yeah.
And I used to think, you never used to apologize.
Yeah.
Remember, I used to tell you this.
Yeah.
You hardly apologize. You
Yeah.
hardly used to make the first move. I'm
Yeah.
always the one to make the first move.
Yeah.
But again, looking back, things have changed a
Yeah.
lot, and we have learned, we have grown. I read a lot of books. You have
Yeah.
read a lot, and we've gone for so many counseling sessions, seminars, learned,
Yeah.
and things are a lot different now, I guess.
It's interesting because a couple of things there. I remember when we used to get into an argument, you saw me as very emotional and very upset. And obviously my reaction to you was anger. And then when I did not get the response that I needed, like the response was from your end was also anger. I was looking for comfort or understanding, but the way or the manner that I brought it up with you was obviously not right. So some men respond in anger, some men just grow quiet. I could not stand either. Sometimes you would just be completely silent and you had nothing to give me. But you never saw the part where I was fearful and anxious on the inside, and I was just seeking validation and understanding. So that was also a contributing factor in our relationship, that we only saw the behavior. Like in the early years, the lens that we were wearing was we were judging each other's behavior, like anger against anger, reaction against reaction, your words against my words. You say something, I would say something back, and then the next thing we're just hitting back at each other. And that was, I think the biggest turnaround was to realize that at some point in the relationship, when we got help in the early years, and that's one of the reasons why I became a therapist, because I wanted couples to be able to see that there was an actual person behind the behavior. That's the first thing, because we all come with our guards up. We all enter into a marriage and into a committed relationship with our guards up. We're all there ready with our defenses. And it's all at an unconscious level. Obviously, it only gets triggered in conflict. And I heard you said, like, it's a good thing that we had those arguments and challenges, because it brought to the surface what was already hidden on the inside. It really exposed us for who we were. And I think what was the biggest thing for me watching in relationship with you, and this is just being very, very vulnerable, that you would come back to me and say, you would apologize. But I never saw it as you making the first step to apologize. I would think, like, even after everything I've done, you're still willing to come and reconcile with me? That was like such a huge, okay, I'm gonna cry. He's still watching.
Wow, I made her cry.
I remember it was not an apology that you came back for. It was more, I saw it from a perspective of you coming back to reconcile with me. And I think for a woman that was big, because for me it felt big because I was lonely, I was struggling. I had all the intelligence to know how to fix my problems, but it never went away until I actually saw it displayed and demonstrated with yourself, coming and pursuing me even when I was at the worst.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand how you feel emotional about all of this. My thought back then was, I'm going to fight for this marriage. So I was determined, because I came from a family where my mom and dad never did marriage well. And I know it's the same for you. And I was determined that I'm going to make this work no matter what. So my thinking was, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And even though a lot of things, in a lot of sense, I could never understand why you felt that way or why you behaved that way. I could never understand it. I mean, the fact is, most of us men don't have that form of intelligence. I mean, we men don't sit around and talk about how we feel about things.
That's right.
We never sit around and talk about why you feel this way, and I felt this way when I went through this. We never do this. Women do, but men don't. We talk about sports and football, and the only emotions you see with us is either we're laughing or we're angry, or we're pissed off about something. We never talk about why we struggle with our marriages or why my wife is behaving this way. It's never part of our conversation. It just never is. So for a man, it's always difficult to understand a woman, because a woman comes with all kinds of emotions. She feels a lot of things, and in the early days, my thinking was, I got to make this work. I could never understand it. I could never understand a lot of what you're going through, but I was determined to make it work. But of course, what I did do is, after going through a lot of our therapy sessions, counseling, what I did do is we both did. We bought books, we started to read, because I wanted to make it work. I started to read and started to understand how marriages work. I started to understand what a woman goes through, what is a woman going through. Because in a lot of cases, for us, we men can just sort of brush things aside and move on. We can sort of park whatever problems we have, and we can just keep moving on. We can sort of compartmentalize things and say, hey, listen, I don't need to deal with this today, but we can keep moving on. In a lot of cases, for a woman, it's difficult because it's always in the forefront. And so when you have that struggle in your marriage, and in this case, I could not see where you're coming from. But what helped me was starting to read and understand that when I don't meet your needs, when I don't understand where you're coming from, and your emotions really is an indication of something deeper, something that's going inside of you. It's an unmet need. It's a feeling that is not validated. It's something that's not touched. So when I started to understand those things, I started to make an effort to listen to deeper in that sense. I started to understand things like, in marriages, when you have a quarrel, when you argue, it's really an indication of what's going on in the marriage. And I learned to see that we clash and we mash. One of the first books I read is, in a marriage you clash and then you mash. You clash and you mash. The clashing indicates or shows things that's going on inside of you. And when we learn to reconcile it, we learn to mash better. We learn to connect better. We learn to bond better. And I guess learning through that from the early days and over the time has helped us to really connect better, bond better, understand one another better. And today we don't have as many arguments as we used to. There used to be a lot more spikes in the early days. Today it's a lot more calmer. We can have decent conversations and agree on a lot of things. We may disagree on some things, but we can still navigate through that.
That's true. And so what I saw was, that's a big thing with men, is just to take initiative. And you took initiative, just to, whether it was to participate in counseling.
Only after I understood that. In the early days, it was like, let us sort it out.
That's true.
She's going through stuff, it's all on her. Until I realized,
but I think
being a man takes initiative as well.
It takes initiative, but I think also part of that realization was also how I used to present myself, because there was, we had our different attachment styles as well, and you were someone who goes silent, either go silent in conflict or you can get really angry, but there would not be a repair after that. I would want to sit down and have the conversation and talk about what had happened in our conflict. And so there are different dimensions of how couple, sort of work through their conflict, but that was our pattern. And I think the more you kept silent or the more angry you got, it fed into this place where I was being dismissed. I was not being heard. But after I too had my own realization that I could not just take all my emotions and just throw it out there. It had to go through a refining process. And for us as women, we need to be able to refine those emotions. And so refining those emotions means to process, like, what is it behind the emotions? What am I looking for? I was looking for understanding. I was looking for companionship because I felt very lonely. That was my dysfunction in that sense from where I grew up with mom and dad. But all of those things, it's interesting as both of us brought it in. And as a couple, the willingness to bring understanding, like to see your own self, what you're looking for, what you're desiring. And I brought that into the relationship, and I think you started to see a little bit more vulnerability than an emotionally angry woman. That sort of motivated or spurred you on to want to be able to take initiative as well. And that started a very healthy pattern between the both of us. The more you took initiative, the more safer I felt. The more safer I felt, the more initiative you took. And that started to help us come into a place where we could address the nitty-gritty of things in our relationship.
Yeah.